All right, I think we should be good to go. So welcome everybody to this lunchtime talk. It's Source to Sink, Aquatic Invasive Species Management Efforts within the Grand River Watershed. And this is actually a really cool collaborative opportunity between the West CISMA and the JLW CISMA, hence the Source to Sink. So we have the source and they have the sink. And this came out of like a meeting. So we were at one of our regional meetings, just, and the two of us were on and we're kind of thinking like, how can we provide some novel outreach that kind of is outside the box of what most groups do. And so we decided that since we both have the Grand River and we have, some similarities and we have some differences in what species we see, where we find them. And so we really thought it'd be a good idea for people to get a flavor for how invasive species impacts and management strategies and even locations could be different, even within the same water body. So with that, I will get started. So Keely, she will kick us off. We have Natalie and Keely, who are coordinators for the West Michigan CISMAs. Unfortunately, Natalie is unable to be here today, so she wasn't feeling quite well. So Keely will start us off. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Shikha, can you see my screen okay?
I can see it perfectly, yeah.
Awesome. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here today. So we are going to cover a few topics. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what a CISMA is and get acquainted with the CISMAs in the state of Michigan. Then we are going to go into what an invasive species is and how the state classifies invasive species. And then we will talk about specific invasive species to the West Michigan CISMA. And then Shikha will take over and talk about the JLW CISMA and what invasive species they're dealing with over there, as well as decontamination protocols and what you can do for invasive species. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we will kind of go over is what is a CISMA? So CISMA stands for Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. A CISMA is a partnership of several different organizations. It could be organizations that are nonprofits, for-profits, government organizations, and the goal is to work across all of those different boundaries to address invasive species in that specific area. So as you can see, the map on the right is a map of Michigan with all of the counties outlined, and every county in Michigan will be covered under a specific CISMA. So the orange arrow is pointing to the West Michigan CISMA, and the magenta arrow on the southern part of Michigan is pointing to the JLW CISMA. So a quick overview of the West Michigan CISMA. This is a map of the 7 counties that we cover. So we go through Allegan, Ottawa, Muskegon, Oceana, Newaygo, Kent, and Montcalm. So the West Michigan CISMA has 2 main projects. The first project is the invasive plant strike teams. So we have 3 strike teams out of the Ottawa, Kent, and Muskegon conservation districts. And those strike teams will focus on terrestrial and aquatic species. And those 3 teams are funded by MISGP funds, which stands for Michigan Invasive Species Grant Program, as well as USFS funds. The second large project that we have is the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid Strike Team. So we only have 1 Hemlock Woolly Adelgid Strike Team at this time out of the Ottawa Conservation District, and they are funded by GLRI and MISGP funds. So here is I wanted to highlight specific points about the West Michigan CISMA and different species that we have here that might be unique or in this part of the state. So the 2 photos on the right are 2 photos of the lakeshore parks that we have in West Michigan. So at the top, we have a photo of a Carner blue butterfly. And then we have a photo in the middle there of a piping plover. And then at the bottom, we have our pitcher's thistle. So these 3 species are species that you can find in our CISMA. So I wanted to highlight these species and this ecosystem because it is pretty unique. We have an awesome resource here in West Michigan for our critical dune ecosystems. We also have 5 large river systems, at least: the Lower Grand, Kalamazoo, Muskegon, Macatawa, and Pentwater. And then, of course, we also have 4 counties that are against Lake Michigan. So what is an invasive species? So the state will define an invasive species as one that is not native and the introduction can cause harm to the economy, environment, and/or human health. The state also defines invasive species in 3 ways. So there are essentially 3 lists that the state uses to define invasive species. The first way is a watch list. So these species will be identified as an immediate and significant threat. They might not be confirmed yet in Michigan, or it might be here in small amounts or small infestations. The second way the state will use to identify invasive species is what's called prohibited. So these would be species that cannot be sold or grown in the state. And then finally, they have a restricted species list, which means that they are maybe established or there's large amounts of these species and they are considered economically detrimental or nuisances. So on the right, I have included a photo of someone who was pulling a trailer, and it looks like they pulled that trailer through invasive species, and those species kind of got caught in the trailer there. So let's talk a little bit about how invasive species spread. So there are several ways that they can spread. The first photo is someone's tread on the bottom of their shoe. As you can see, there's a ton of mud in that shoe, and oftentimes you can carry fragments of plants or seeds or any piece of a plant that might be able to reproduce. Sometimes when we are hiking, we might go hiking out to a muddy area and then the next day go to a new area. Oftentimes we can take invasive species with us without realizing that. So the photo on the right, the top right, shows someone who is out boating, and it looks like they have all this plant material in their trailer and their boat. And, you know, if they go out to a site that doesn't have a specific species, and then they go out to their neighbor's lake or their friend's lake in a different county the next day, that's material that they're taking with them. And then the bottom left photo is showing the tread on some construction equipment, and that's another way that invasive species can be moved around as well. And then the photo on the right, you'll see some plant material sticking out of that wheel well, and that's another way that invasives can be spread. So other examples would be contaminated imports, nursery stock, just being on the boxes that come over. Ballast water is another example. When individuals plant some of these invasive species as ornamentals, those can be reseeded and spread that way. And then finally, kind of what we already talked about, transported by people. So through gear, vehicles, hiking boots, and sometimes dogs as well. And Shikha will talk a little bit later about what to do to prevent the spread of invasives. So why are invasives a problem? Why do we care? So the photo on the top right, I think all 3 of these photos honestly can really display why we care. So the photo on the top right is a photo of a species called kudzu. So kudzu is an invasive vine that has really taken over parts of the southern United States. And this is a photo from the southern United States. And as you can see, it totally just blankets that ecosystem and that landscape. And it's choking out all that vegetation and completely changing that landscape. The photos on the bottom are both photos of Japanese knotweed growing through concrete. So as you can imagine, that's not great for buildings or foundations. So in total, invasive species can be a threat to our economy, environment, and human health and safety. So I wanted to also touch on why JLW and West Michigan are working together to bring more awareness about the invasive species in and around the Grand River. So we are both connected by the Grand River, as Shikha had mentioned earlier. And if you remember, this is the map of the CISMAs. So this is the West Michigan CISMA here, and this is the JLW CISMA. And then this kind of shows you where the Grand River flows. So we're kind of showing you why we're coming together, because we are connected. And it's important to realize that invasive species don't care about county boundaries or city limits. So it's important to work together to be able to bring that awareness to these species. So let's talk about what a watershed is. So the photo on the right is the watershed for the Grand River. So a watershed is essentially the area of land where all of that water that ends up on that land will drain into. So the red area outlines that watershed. So let's say it rains over here in Maple River. That water will eventually end up in the Grand River, which will eventually end up in Lake Michigan. So that's just a little bit about the watershed and kind of the background on that. And again, the West Michigan CISMA is over here on the left side, and then JLW is down here. So let's get into the species now for the West Michigan CISMA. So I do have some maps of each of the species I will talk about, and then Shikha will also touch on some species, and there might be some of the species I talk about, Shikha might have in her CISMA, and vice versa. So the first one I would like to touch on is yellow floating heart. So yellow floating heart is on the watch list. So Michigan has put this species on the watch list. You can identify it by its flower. It's pretty showy. It has those fringes, or those like fringed edges, if you will, and they're kind of scalloped on the petals. The seeds are barbed, so they can easily stick onto waterfowl, ducks, dogs, things like that. So that's kind of how that species spreads. It can form really dense mats on the water surface, and it's pretty aggressive when it spreads. So a reminder for when we talk about treatment, any treatment that is done on a water body or in water, you will need to obtain an ANC permit to do those treatments. And we do treatments for some of these species, and we do have those correct permits that we need. So for yellow floating heart, you can do a chemical or a manual removal. So for chemical, you would want to apply the herbicide in early summer, and then for the manual removal, make sure that you get all of those Phragmites, and you can do that in spring or early summer. And if you need more information on how to do some of these things, make sure that you get our phone number or our email and just reach out to us afterwards. So as you can see, the size of yellow floating heart is about the size of someone's palm. So it's not super large, and there's another species that we'll talk about in a second that's much smaller. And this is what yellow floating heart can do. So as I mentioned, it can really form those dense mats, and it can completely change that ecosystem of that water body. So here is a map of yellow floating heart, and this was taken from Misson, and we'll talk a little bit more about Misson later. So it's not as widespread. We do have some infestation in Kent County, and I know that we are hand pulling those infestations at this time. So next, let's talk about European frogbit. So European frogbit is classified as on the watch list for the state of Michigan. You can identify it by a couple key things. So it does flower, and it has 3 petals that are, it's a white flower, and the shape of the leaves are pretty heart-shaped, or they look like a really tiny lily pad to me. And as you can see, the photo of someone holding that leaf right there, it's pretty small leaves. The photo up here on the top left is our turions, and that is kind of what frogbit will produce. So those are like seed-like structures, and they will fall over winter and winterize at the bottom of the lake or the river system. And then in the spring, those will float up and kind of grow into the leaf that you're seeing. So the problem with frogbit is that it will alter the chemistry or the ecology of the system that it is in. And it's really easy to transport this species because of those small seed-like structures. Those can get stuck on things and overwinter. And then next thing you know, it's in a whole new area that you had no idea. So treatment for frogbit would be chemical or a hand removal. Again, you would need the correct ANC permit to do that. So you want to hand remove in spring or early summer. So we're about to get started with our frogbit season here soon, but you want to get that done before those little turions are produced. And then here is a photo several years ago. This was taken. This is a pretty large infestation, and this is kind of what the hand removal would look like. So this is an infestation that I think would be too large to hand remove. Oftentimes I recommend to landowners that if they have it and in small quantities, then it's totally doable to go ahead and hand remove those. But you would double bag that material and dispose of it that way. Here is kind of a map of what we're looking at for European frogbit and where it's at in the state compared to thinking about over here in the West Michigan CISMA and then over here on the east side. So I think MISN is a great tool. Again, this map is from MISN. The methods that we're using for removal of frogbit are a couple things here. West Michigan, we do some herbicide spraying on them, but we also do some mechanical hand pulling as well on those smaller infestations. So next, let's talk about Phragmites. So this is a species that Michigan has labeled as a restricted species. It can grow 15 feet tall with 80% of the biomass that you're seeing is actually underground. So I think that's important to remember when you are thinking about Phragmites. You will often see this species along wetlands, grasslands, along the side of the road, anywhere where there's kind of like that wet soil. That's kind of what they prefer. So it could be transported by wind, animals, hunters. The problem is that it creates this huge monoculture. As you can see in the top right photo and the bottom right photo, it just creates a huge monoculture, and it can kind of dry up wetlands and change that ecosystem completely. So we do chemical treatments for Phragmites in the fall. That is what we have found as to be the best time of year to do those treatments. So we will start doing those sometime this September. And then here is just another photo of, how Phragmites can really alter the ecosystem and create that dense sand. And unlike the other two species that we've already touched on, Phragmites is pretty widespread throughout the state. So I think this map kind of shows you that there are infestations in, if not every county, in most counties. So Phragmites is a pretty common invasive species, but it still is detrimental to our ecosystem. So I believe this is the last species I will be talking about. So Japanese knotweed. And we knew that this wasn't exactly an aquatic species, but there are still ways that it can spread aquatically. So Japanese knotweed is labeled as prohibited in the state of Michigan. You can identify it by its zigzaggy branch, and it has these purple speckles on those branches. It can grow pretty tall. So on the bottom right photo, you can see that infestation is getting pretty tall. And again, with this species, just like with Phragmites, most of that biomass is going to be underground. So this species, also like Phragmites, is pretty widespread throughout the state. It can be easily transported by fragmentation, so I highly recommend to refrain from cutting or mowing near the plant, and do not move any of that plant material into a compost. So that's kind of how, that's kind of how Japanese knotweed will spread, is through those small fragments of the plant. It can grow these really like dense thickets. And like I said earlier, it can grow through foundations, and it does change the chemistry of the soil, and it will alter kind of what plants can grow near it. So it will change the chemistry of the soil to create more of a preference for the plant, if that makes sense. There's a couple of ways that you can treat Japanese knotweed. What we do is 2 different methods. We do a foliar spray of the plant, and then we also do some injections as well. And then here you can see along this tree line, that is all Japanese knotweed getting into that forest. And then the top left photo, again, Japanese knotweed is pretty gnarly, and it can grow in very unusual places. And again, it's pretty widespread throughout the state of Michigan. So just like with Phragmites, if it's not in every county, then it's on its way. So this is a species that I think is really important to look out for, just with all the species I've talked about so far today. And then I wanted to include my contact information. So if you're located in one of the counties that is a part of West Michigan, take down my email and my phone number and connect with me to learn more about the programs that we have, and if you have any specific questions on any of the species that we talk about today. And I'm going to let Shikha take over now.
And then you can also maybe put it in the chat, I guess.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. How's that, Shikha? Did that work?
I think it will. Bring this up. All right. So thank you for that wonderful intro to the seminar. And I am going to see if I could minimize this or hide. There we go. So as it was mentioned, we are part of the source. And, you know, for the JLW CISMA, we do cover Jackson, Lenawee, Washtenaw, and some of our goals are to increase community awareness. I mean, that's with a lot of CISMAs, and then promote measures to increase the resiliency of our ecosystems, increase local capacity, and early detection, rapid response. And you'll actually see number 4 at play later on in my presentation. And before I begin the technical part, I really want to get your mind thinking about Michigan and the importance of invasive species. And so when you think of Michigan, what do you typically think of? And probably, you know, lush parks and forests, creeks and rivers with a variety of species. And, you know, we have a beautiful, the Massasauga rattlesnake over here, which is like the melanistic phenotype. We find a lot of them in Lenawee County, and as opposed to like the Blandings turtles, various mussels and butterflies, etc. We also have a very diverse landscape. We have a lot of fens, wetlands, parks, nature reserves, and a couple that I would like to highlight. the Waterloo Rec area and the Pinckney Rec area. That's like to the north part of our jurisdiction. And it's a really cool area because it's basically a lot of connected habitat. So you get a lot of birds and animals being able to move back and forth between the counties. We also have Hay State Park down south in Lenawee County. Again, it's it has a Wampler's Lake, a variety of cool species and unique habitats there as well. Watkins Lake State Park is one of those unique joint partnerships between the state and county agencies. And so it straddles the Jackson and Washtenaw borders and is a really cool designated waterfowl refuge. And so we get a lot of birds and ducks and, geese and flying in. People come and do a lot of birding, but there unfortunately are some invasive species there as well that we're trying to eliminate. So some of the species that we are working on, the first one will be a little bit familiar, so frogbit. And so some of our partners are Eagle, and so we work with them. We kind of go out, and we have a big project that's going to take place. A few CISMAs are a part of that. And just to remind you that it is a free-floating, potentially it can root in shallow water, but that's probably more, like near the edges. And here's an aerial view of our sites. And so the red dots are pretty much where we've seen frogbit. And so there's definitely places that are by like heavily used lakes. And this is like Waterloo Rec area. And there's, a lot of good recreational activities going on in this area. One site that I would like to draw your attention to, it really highlights the importance of how invasive species can get missed and easily transported. So here in this site, we have a bunch of cattails and purple loosestrife. And this is the cattails. I mean, there are native ones, but a lot of the ones that we see here are the invasive ones. And you can kind of see lily pads and all sorts of things. But if you look closely in some of those patches and areas, you'll see frogbit. And so you can imagine how the first year you may miss it. And then by the time you do start seeing it, that's, when action is really, you need to be really quick. And this little bottom picture I have shows how some of these species could be, mistaken. And so I want you to give you a quick 20-second quiz in your mind. Which one of these is frogbit? 1, 2, 3, or 4? And 4 is referring to this one. All right, so in your mind, have an answer ready. And the answer is 3. So 3 is European frogbit. And so at our Green Lake site, again, we have a cool boat launch here as well. And this site is near a rustic campground. There's like homes on one side, but a lot of people come and go. There's a public boat launch, and on one side, it kind of borders a really busy road. And if you look at some of these pictures taken at Green Lake, you can see how tiny some of them are and how it could be very easily missed and brought in on boats and various gear. So you can get a better idea. And, as before, it, forms a dense mat. So it does prefer slow moving waters, and there's a couple of different ways it might spread: boats, kayaks, aquarium, waterfowl. We don't really know whether it's waterfowl or waterfowl hunters or recreationalists. We don't have a good, proof or a smoking gun, so to speak, with how they got here and how they're moving around. But once they get here, it could impact the flow. If you have really, big patches, they can get tangled up into your boats, change the flow, especially if it's a small pond or a creek. And as was mentioned before, reduces oxygen and light and changes the chemistry. Another species that we're looking at, and hopefully I think we have it under control, is parrot feather. And parrot feather, this was a lot of the work was done by Eagle. So they did all the legwork, we kind of helped with monitoring, etc. But these also prefer slow moving habitats, and they're absolutely gorgeous. They are feathery, bright green leaves. They can grow up to 1 foot above the water and form dense mats. And the submerged leaves might actually be like reddish in color. So if you see them and, like a bright green, fluffy plant with a lot of red stems, it could be very similar. It could be a parrot feather. In the US, a lot of the plants are female, and it got into the environment a lot of reasons, mainly due to stocking. So when it was legal, people used to put them in their ponds, and when those ponds overflowed, it kind of took over other areas and it flowed down the creeks. And aquarium dumping. So this is a very popular plant that people used to put in their aquariums. And when people were sick and tired of their aquariums, or they had to move and, take it other places, a lot of people dumped them out, and then, it became a problem later on. So some of the sites in Jackson that we found this in was a former nursery site. And so, the new owners took it over, and they're like, oh, we have this plant, it's taken over our ponds. And so that's when they contacted Eagle for help. We've also seen this in backyard ponds. So this is a resident in Washtenaw County. And so we did see a small backyard pond. We don't know how it got here, and it really took over. And this is kind of like a success story. We've, it's been treated. We use herbicides to treat this, because even a small fragment can result in another plant. And so with many of these plants, whether it's turions for frog bit, or, small pieces of the root or the stem or leaves, they can spread very easily. And, birds, wildlife who come and go do have a role. So after a few years of treatment, we only saw 1 or 2 sprigs. So that was kind of cool. And then we've also seen this in those subdivision ponds, those, I don't know if they're like retention ponds or just community fishing ponds. They overflow for flooding. And so we've seen them there. And this is also a success story. I think it's been treated, but it's something that we need to monitor continuously. And so this is actually in a region that's not in the JLW region, but just like next door. And as you can see, parrot feather has, spread over time. In 1890, like a couple of spots over here. And then as the years, go on, you can see how dense and new population. So in Michigan, there are a few populations that you can see. Now, remember how I was talking about early detection, rapid response. And so that's the approach we're taking with red swamp crayfish. There are many different kinds of crayfish in Michigan, some that you see more than others. And this is a diagram that the state of Michigan and Central Michigan University have put together. And we are focusing on the red swamp crayfish. And this is the crayfish that you see in a lot of restaurants and for buffets. They are, dark, but their bodies can differ. So see how these are same species, but this is a little bit more grayer, more olive color. And we've seen red swamp that are like almost, a bluish black to a really, really dark brown. So their bodies colors can differ. So a couple of things to kind of keep in mind is you have to look at the elongated head and the triangular rostrum. So that's like that pointy little, I like to call it that stabby, fork. They can use, and then look for the bright red bumps on their claws. And they like permanent freshwater habitat. So we don't tend to see these guys in, fast flowing waters, mainly just, retention ponds, lakes, and stuff as in areas like that. So here's a couple other pictures I wanted to show you. Here's one, it's a female, and she's got a bunch of eggs. And then here's a freshly molted one. So they do when they grow, they shed their other skins. And here's a baby one. I think it's like, a couple weeks old. I'm not really good at aging them, but you can kind of see. And there's another telltale sign, at least for the red swamp that we've seen in Michigan, is if you flip them over, they'll have like this black line down the bottom. Now these young juveniles are pretty translucent, so you can actually see that black line down over here. But as it gets older and the shell gets hardened, you'll have to flip this guy over and you'll have to see the black line on the underside. So we were seeing them in small pockets, you know, ponds, golf clubs. So that's where we're focusing our areas. We do have traps out. They are also spread via bait release. So people used to buy them on the fresh market and then, you know, eat some, and then, you know, some of the leftovers are used for fishing. Also, these guys are very mobile, so they can cover a lot of distance on land, you know, go through pipes. And teachers used to be able to order these guys for their classroom. And when the, you know, session was over, nobody really wanted to take these, you know, classroom pets home. So with pomp and circumstance, I can imagine all these teachers and some students like going to the nearest pond and then having a nice release ceremony, and then, you know, going on and then doing again next year. So some of these crayfish have been released that way. And so one thing to kind of take note, so when you are ordering food online, because of, you know, all these ordering services, there are places that you can actually buy red swamp crayfish online and have it delivered to you. And some of these places don't know that Michigan, you know, is prohibited to sell the sale of live red swamp crayfish. You can buy them already cooked, you know, dead, but you cannot buy them live. And so that's, you know, an area that we're trying to reach out to people, make sure you're not ordering, or check before you order live species online. So some of these crayfish can really alter the ecosystem. They can introduce diseases. They are very competitive and aggressive, so they can outcompete native species, and they can cause erosion. As you can see, all these like little holes destabilizes the riverbank or the, you know, the pond banks, and that's not a good thing, especially if you have structures nearby. We don't have marbled crayfish right now spotted in the wild, but it has recently been put on our watch list. And so we're definitely keeping our eye out for this one. This one is a little bit scary because it reproduces through parthenogenesis. So it has the ability to self-clone. And it is being sold in stores in other places of the country. So they are prohibited here. So if you see anything, they vary in color. They could be this mottled color, or they can be a little bit bluish in color. So definitely keep an eye out for these guys. And I also will mention knotweed. We do have some projects at play, and some of our efforts have been doing treatment at local parks, especially in Lenawee County. There's a spot near River Raisin, and in Cascades Park in Jackson, we do have some Japanese knotweed. And this actually is a good example of how what you do locally can impact, you know, other areas. So this Japanese knotweed, you know, kind of is near McCain Drain, which goes into Sandstone Creek, which goes into the Upper Grand River. So, you know, in a worst case scenario, you could have over time some of these species going from one small county park and then via drain and activity end up in the Grand River. And so this kind of brings us as to why we are, you know, doing a joint session. Is the JLW CISMA is in a unique position because we are the source of the Grand River. But if you look at this map, all those pink dots represent public boat launches. And so you can imagine people, you know, who live in this area going, you know, one side 1 week and then traveling the other side the other week, or, you know, going north, south, east, and west. And some of these places have really, really big frogbit infestations. Some of them have red swamp crayfish. Some of them have, you know, Phragmites, etc. So we really urge people to decontaminate, you know, their equipment when they are fishing, hunting, or just even recreating. So the JLW CISMA has two major highways, so I-94 and US 127. We are a good link between Lake Erie and Michigan with a lot of public boat launches, as you saw before. And Lake Erie in the Saginaw Bay region has a really healthy frogbit population. And that area also is good for walleye fishing. So people will go to certain areas and fish for certain species, certain tournaments, and they'll come back and they'll go somewhere else. And just a reminder, that was, you know, mentioned before, that section 41325, all watercraft equipment, or watercraft trailers, they need to remove all plants, drain the bilge water, before you transport over land and before launching into a water body. And just to show how easy it is to go back and forth between the West CISMA and then the JLW CISMA, is that it only takes about 2 hours and 50 minutes. So 2 hours and 50 minutes to go from one end to the other. So it's a very doable drive. And then, you know, same amount of distance, it'll take you like 3.5 hours to get from Lansing to Charlevoix. So a lot of these species, they can survive out of water for a couple of days, especially if they're kept in a damp, dark environment and they don't dry out. And so we are doing programs like this just to increase people's awareness. And this is a graph that every invasive species biologist, throws up, and basically all it's saying is when a species first gets here, there's less of them, less area infested. And so it's a lot cheaper and easier to, detect and eradicate those invasive species. But over time, if you don't do anything about it, it gets really expensive. The infestation is just so big that you're only just trying to manage and do local control at this point. And unfortunately, for a lot of these species, public awareness typically begins right in this exponential growth, like right in the middle. And so with seminars like this, we're hoping to get people more aware and participating in ways to prevent the spread. And so some things you could do is check your clothing and gear for insects and seeds, burn firewood where you buy it. So these are more generalistic. Report any sightings or unusual species to MISN, and make sure that you really clean, drain, dry boats and kayaks before leaving, and decontaminate, disinfect your waders and fishing gear. So what is MISN? MISN is a really cool app. It's something you can download on your phone, and you can actually report whether or not a species is present or absent. And you can just, when you download it, you can click what type of, species that you're looking at, whether it's birds, crustaceans. And then once you do that, another menu pops up with some of the species listed. You click on that one. So we clicked red swamp crayfish. And here's the fun part. You can actually report whether it's present or absent. And if you click some of these other pictures, you'll get more information. So if you click, like map, you can kind of get some pictures of where they're found. If you want to see what they look like, the species, before you actually report it, they'll show pictures. And then when you hit, the report presence, you can actually fill out, how big what the area was, the density. You can make comments and pictures, and that information is stored in a database. And some of the species, such as red swamp crayfish, frogbit, that would, that's something that some of the state and federal and CISMA coordinators are keeping an eye out for, so we might actually follow up, or kind of look in and go in and see what's happening in that area that you reported. So kind of just to conclude, Michigan has a lot of beautiful natural resources, and they're very, pristine in some areas, but some of them have a lot of invasive species. And with our, efforts and with your interest and due diligence, we can prevent those beautiful areas from becoming, something like this. And so if you have any questions, we have about 15 minutes, so a lot of time for questions. And I can actually stop sharing my screen. And I see a chat open, and then so I will put my info here.
Awesome. If you all have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can raise your hand with the raise hand option. Or you can just throw a question in the chat as well.
Yeah. Yes. The Louisiana lake is typically known as the red swamp crayfish. And it's like plentiful, down south. So you go to, like the creeks. I know, Kenny, you might be able to agree with me, but there's a lot of red swamp crayfish in the south.
Yes. And by the way, if anybody catches any, I will dispose of them for free.
Thank you.
Hey,
So, yeah.
this may be a truly dumb question or maybe a hard question to answer. But since I am at the head of the Grand River, is there any way of knowing in correct time now and past times have we as the head river sent you down river invasive species and things like that? Or is that any way of knowing?
That's a hard question because, I mean, for even with Phragmites, we have seen it across the watershed, and it's just, we don't know with some of these things.
And are you going to keep on having the kayak and the ski boats and everything else wash stations at the put-ins? Take out?
Well, that's a good question. So, you know, as you can, some of those are pretty, you know, expensive. Some places do have them, and there are different, you know, mechanisms of having, like, one setup is just having some tools on a, you know, a board that's like kind of tethered. People can brush and scrub. Other places that have some funding, there's like a pressurized system. There's a couple of things to kind of think about. And do you have a water, do you have, you know, a proper area and space for people to do this? Do you have a place to dispose of some waters if people are doing it before they get into the water? So a couple different questions to kind of think about. It would be great to have them. And I think Keely, maybe you can mention, you know, your thoughts on that as well.
I'm sorry, I was answering the chat.
Yeah.
What was the question?
It's about having, you know, boat wash stations and, you know, cleaning mechanisms at, you know, some of these boat launches for kayaks, etc.
Yeah. So we do some of that in the summer as well. Like what we do, so we use kayaks and we have a boat to go out and treat some of these species. We will take them into our our parking lot driveway, and we will use a power washer with some soap to wash all that gear off, the waders, boots, all of it. So that works, and then letting it dry in the sun, making sure everything is dried out before you're going back out.
And you could have like a little kit in your car, right? So you could have some diluted chlorine and some cloth to kind of wipe things down before you leave, and have a brush.
Shikha, we're fixing the parks is fixing to open the ADA boat launch at Vandercook. Why don't you talk to Kyle and see if you could put a table up there for the purpose of talking about washing boats, because we're going to have so many coming in that way.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to keep that in mind. Yeah, thank you. And I don't think I know GLEDN. So Kathy, do you know that one, Keely?
No, I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, you know, everybody talks about missing, and I had that downloaded on my phone for a very long time, but it seemed like at least 50% of the time or more, it wouldn't work when I was out in the field. You know, I'd try to look something up, or and it wouldn't, I don't know, it didn't work right. And so I ended up finding this other software, which, you know, is not exactly the same, but it helps you identify invasive species, and I think you can report them. So I ended up downloading that, and I just deleted missing because every time I went in there, it wouldn't work right. So I didn't know if, I guess, if it's just me, or if maybe they've improved it, or.
No, it's definitely not you. It depends on, you know, because, you know, a lot of these places are in, you know, covered, you know, forest. There's not a lot of signal. So I know even I've had some issues, you know, depending on where I was. Sometimes, you know, you can save it and then you just upload it, you know, when you get to an area with good signal. You can also log on to your desktop and do it, you know, put stuff in there to kind of make some notes about where you are, and then go and manually do it that way. I also know that there is a lot of conversation about combining or collaborating with some of these other places, and like having the data shared. So that's one thing.
Another option is iNaturalist, if you all have ever heard of that. I can link that in the chat as well. But I think that individuals in the state of Michigan are starting to look at that a little bit more as well.
Yes, I also have iNaturalist, and that's cool. And then there's also another question about, what would your recommendation to spread awareness? I think even just attending various seminars like this from different groups and organizations, because we all talk about different species depending on what's in our area. And so, if you have a cottage, make sure you know what CISMA is in that cottage area, and just so you're aware. And I know that social media has been huge for us. We often post a lot of things on social media. So, if you have that, follow us. We have a place where you can sign up for our bulletin, and I can put that in the chat in a couple seconds. And so you can, kind of keep connected via on like email newsletters and, attending our meetings, both CISMAs, we have partner meetings. If you belong to an organization, definitely reach out to us and say that, become a partner, because then, you're able to attend some of our meetings and then learn about some of the issues and projects that we have in place and what we're concerned about. And if you have things that you want to talk about, you can share that at that point as well. So forming partnerships, but definitely if you see seminars, share it with your members. And then the more people out there looking for these things, the better. Oops. So yeah, let me pull out our bulletin. So we have a link right here. So if you want to be part of our monthly, you can, click the link down here. We hate spam, so we won't spam you. We won't share and sell your data or email address to anyone. Oh yeah, thanks, Keely. Yeah.
No problem. If anyone is in the West Michigan CISMA or owns property or anything in West Michigan, you can email me and I will get you added to our listserv.
Perfect. And I know people are part of both, right? So definitely, I think I see Zach on here. I don't know if you want to say hello or not. You're muted, so maybe.
Oh yeah, hi.
So yeah, I think you are also a CISMA coordinator.
Yep, I'm the CISMA coordinator for the Barry, Calhoun, and Kalamazoo Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area.
So yeah, if you're in Barry, Calhoun, and Kalamazoo, you can definitely reach out to Zach. Zach, do you mind putting your your contact information just in the chat, just so people have it? Yeah, I'm like sure. Calling you out. I couldn't resist. I feel like the more we we get there, if you know people there, you can share that information.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Does anyone have any more questions?
All right. Well, it's 12:56, so I'll stay on for a little, maybe a couple of minutes, just if you have any lingering questions. And thank you for joining us on your lunch hour. And so we got you out right in time. And
thanks,
Keely,
everyone.
Are you able to stay for a minute or two?
Yeah.
Perfect.